Greetings, everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Dr. David Walton. I'm the director of the Global Black Studies program at Western Carolina University. And I want to thank you to our spring finale. I want to thank you for joining us for our spring finale webinar for our academic year 2020-2021 webinar series. First, I would like to thank the university, the College of Arts and Sciences for their support of the Global Black Studies program and other collaborators at the university. I would like to give honor and thanks for allowing us to be guests on their land to the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation. I think it's always important that we always acknowledge, the original inhabitants, the indigenous people to spaces that we occupy, because we are truly guests, regardless of our circumstances, to come into occupying these spaces. And I would love, and I'm so happy that she agreed to do it, for everyone to be as excited as I am to welcome a friend of mine, a up and coming, a rising star, a rising scholar, Dr. Kanye Marshall. She is an assistant professor of American religions at the University of Rochester. Uh, I know her work. I'm not an expert on it, but I'm familiar with her work through her conference presentations. We were grad students together, so we helped each other develop our writing and some of our ideas just by discussions with other graduate students. And I think it's very, very important and very, very intriguing. Uh, the field that she does her research in is a very intriguing and exciting, and I would argue, growing and expanding field, and that is rhetoric. And that's something that I first came in contact with at Michigan State University as a graduate student, when as a TA, because I had prior community college teaching, my first year's TA, and I wasn't a TA, I actually taught standalone courses. And they were in the writing, rhetoric, and American culture department for first year writing. So through training to do that assignment, I got a base level understanding of some of the concepts and notions. And I just remember being so excited about the type of things, I could do with students because of the, the very uh, nuanced concept to rhetoric. So I'm glad. So welcome her, welcome her. And today we're going to talk about Black women's rhetoric. And I think in world culture, particularly American culture, and I can even say more specifically, American culture in the South, Black women's rhetoric has become increasingly understood, and its agency and use and the goal of agency is becoming more and more prevalent to people who may have ignored it or were blind to it before. And so I just want her to educate us on what is Black women's rhetoric, different aspects to it, such as how is it used or misused, how has it advanced the struggle for Black equality, how has it challenged patriarchy and misogyny? And this is just me being me. I am a little controversial. Has it been co-opted or appropriated? And if so, by who? Because I think cultural appropriation, and when we're talking about Black women's rhetoric, in many ways, we're talking about their voice being co-opted or appropriated is some powerful stuff to deal with. So I didn't mean to do all that, but I wanted to set the page for our conversation. So
no, I welcome it. I welcome it. And I thank you so much, Dr. Walton, for this invitation and for what you're doing at Western Carolina University with their Global Black Studies, this webinar series. We talked a little bit before this, but this is amazing. And it's great to just have a dialogue about what you're doing instead of having to prepare some type of lecture. This is what we do. So it's interesting that people want to talk about it. And I'll do my best to address some of the questions you have, as I'm excited about this topic. As you stated before, we both went to Michigan State University, which has a particular kind of placement or relationship to the field of rhetoric. And I'm glad you talked about the field of rhetoric, even as a person like me who's in religion, right? So how does that work? So I'll try to explain that a little bit, and then we'll get to the controversy, as you say, the co-op thing. Michigan State University is interesting in the fact that they have started what we call cultural rhetorics, right? You've heard of this. Cultural rhetorics tends to shape the field differently than it has been before, all right? Before, what we've known rhetoric to be is to be cultivated by Roman and Greco-Roman, Greek and Roman literature, right? We understand rhetoric mostly from Aristotle and Plato concepts. And it makes sense in the sense, it makes sense to a particular degree because their public oratory or their public speaking engagements were in the church or in the law room, right? Or in the courtroom. So when they're interpreting or analyzing rhetoric or language in the sense, they're trying to figure out what is its use, right? Ultimately, what is its function, right? And so they come up with some terms which are very insightful. And one of those terms is persuasion, right? And I want to talk about persuasion because I think we use it as a metonym for rhetoric, right? We think of rhetoric sometimes, some of us do, as persuasion, right? And it could be, right? It could be those things like persuasion, audience, right? And it could be something else, right? For Black people, right? Let's just talk about Black people. If we're talking about language, how are we using language? Is it primarily in the courtroom and church? Hope not, right? We're doing other things with language as well, right? We may be, playing the dozens, right? And talking about each other. We may be rapping, poetry. And so what it is that I do is I look at Black women's public speeches or language. It could be rap. I look at public orators. So it could be rap, Lauryn Hill. We have Megan Thee Stallion and Becca Leese who are putting out some very provocative language, if you will. So when I say public orators, I'm thinking rappers, preachers, right? Comedians, right? For the most part, these people who are speaking amongst an audience, a live audience. And instead of just language, and I think people, it's hard to situate what is language, what is rhetoric, all right? So language has a whole set of categories that come along with it. How do I know that someone's speaking a language? It has grammar, right? It has syntax, it has vocabulary, right? So when someone says, are people stealing Black women's rhetoric or language, they may think about a phraseology or vocabulary that Black women have introduced, right, to the world.
But they use it to communicate like very complex ideas and concepts though, right?
Right. And I like that you say that word, communicate. So it's not just language or the words, right? It is the meaning making behind the words, right? So the language becomes, right, just an articulation of our consciousness. That's what language is. Outside of context, language doesn't serve much, right? I need you as the audience person or the person talking to me to be able to decode the codes that I speak, right? So if I say Dr. Walton, si tu veux faire quelque chose après ça, on va aller à un bar. Alors, language, codes, but if you don't understand those codes, it doesn't matter, right? So you need the engagement, the receptors, and that's just with language. Now let's add the context and cultural, right? So let's say a Black woman might put two words together and say something like, boy, bye, right? Standard American English wouldn't have those words juxtaposed in that way. You might say, bye, girl, or bye, boy, but to invert that and then to state it is not just linguistical, but it is cultural, right? So you're inferring, it's almost inferring a dismissal. It's not a greeting or a salutation that is taking place, even though it's just bye. It is, what are you trying to articulate in the language, right? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so what we want to look at is, and it's hard because they work together, language and rhetoric, right? What are these people saying and what does it mean? And that for me is very interesting. Let me try to get to some more of your questions. You ran through a slew.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. They're gonna help me. So how is it used, right? I want to talk specifically about how I came to it, and I think it'd be helpful. I'm interested in how I became interested first in language, right? How we talk to each other, different languages. How do we communicate with different audiences, right? If I have a certain topic, let's say it's my birthday, May 1st, because it is, right? And I want to communicate that to that I'm having a party to my grandmother, right? That because of that audience, I might communicate it differently to her than my Saras, right? Or my sorority sisters, right? That's just based on audience, right? And language does have that kind of requirement that the audience understands what you're speaking to. The thing about Black women's rhetoric that's so profound is not just the language that they're using, because for the most part, 80% of Black people use African American vernacular English, which is a language that has remnants of Western African language traditions, right? Whether that be syntax, grammar, and or intonation, right? You'll get a lot of people, I know you're from the Detroit area, where the emphasis on police for Black people would be would you not, police?
Yeah,
not
the police.
The police, right? The police, right?
I pronounce it correctly, the police.
It's correct, it's correct. So we have language, right? We have African American vernacular English, and we also have what am I really saying beneath it, right? What are my cultural assumptions saying? Right?
And then for that, in Detroit, is really linked to ethnic history of job occupations and Polish police officers.
Right.
So that's where the emphasis, half a century before I was born, I should say, that, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, but indeed, right. So it's communicating something that doesn't mean nothing in 2021, but it meant something in 1970.
And that's real, right? Knowing the historiography of where it came from. And I like that we're talking about language now, right? And that's easy to kind of talk about communicating through language, which are vocal or visual kind of codes that communicate a particular message. Now, what about those things that are not quote unquote language, right? We are reading each other, right, with cues that exist beyond language, right? You have on a particular hat, right? it may signify to me that we are, among the crimson and cream dream, right? You haven't said anything about your fraternal, right, belongings or affiliations, right? But it, based on what you have worn, it has communicated something to me. So I feel safe. I feel that you already understand a certain level of communication or commitment to Black community and Black education, right? Just based off what you wore, right? And so that communicates too. We want to think about rhetoric as a certain type of understanding or communicating, but it doesn't have to be only language. All right. You open the piece, or you opened our Zoom communication, given reference to the Cherokee Nation, which I applaud that, and I'm definitely going to borrow that. I think it's beautiful to figure out or know what spaces we're inhabiting. And there are communities like that who communicate things through maybe a wampum belt or a quilt, right? Or different things, right? So
as
I'm
Black women did in slavery, in Africa, right? Quilt.
Black women did in slavery, right? And so some of them stitched in maps, right? Some of them stitched in familial ties and different things that would have them remembering things. But that is essentially what I do, right? I'm looking at those communication codes that Black women inherently use to articulate a particular message. Right? I do work with language, but language is not words and codes in of itself. All right. So primarily right now I'm working on Black women preachers. And because for me, thinking through if we're articulating our consciousness, I'm interested in belief practices, right? And how belief shapes our consciousness, right? And so what are Black women doing? Or what are they saying that is communicating a particular change in the world? And I think that was one of your questions, right?
Yeah.
What are Black women saying? Black women have a precarious situation because they're both woman and they're Black, right? If you look up a Black person, you'll find a man. If you look up a white, or if you look up a woman, you'll find a white woman primarily. So when Black women have this intricate space that they navigate, in which Black women have always been speaking. And I like that you said that we're in this space now where people may be listening, right? Or co-opting, right? I like that you used that word because both institutions or both groups of people, both white women and Black men, have not always listened to their women. And now I believe that it is, if we're just, speaking frank, now I think it's hard not to. I think it's hard not to. Black women in politics or even in history have been the only ones to consistently vote in their best interest. And they've had a consistent message that they wanted equity amongst gender and the races. And they've always had to create that space. I like that.
Black women. I just gave this lecture today. Mm-hmm. So I gave it on Tuesday too. In my long history of the long civil rights movements course. Mm-hmm. And I was given the case study of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. And basically had to break down to them, going all the way back to the Women's Political Council, that was a Black women's movement. Black women created that movement, led that movement, sustained that movement. It wasn't Dr. Martin Luther King and all that, you know what I'm saying? It was Joanne Robinson, and it was, and I forget the names, and I apologize, and I just gave the lecture. I'm so sorry, sister. But the founder of the WPC and first president, the second president, Joanne Robinson, and then another sister, and they was all faculty at Alabama State. But nonetheless, right? So I'm sorry, I didn't mean that.
No, I thank you for jumping in on that, because those things are helpful in just knowing what Black women have done. Like, Black women have been the progenitors of many movements. I speak towards, I talk about Sojourner Truth, right? Sojourner Truth, or Isabella Brumfree. You know, she bust on the scene in, you know, in the 19th century in Ohio at a white women's conference. You know, they had a white women's they had a women's conference where only white women were on the program.
On the conference.
And, you know, we can liken that to our women's conference now. You know, how many trans sisters do we have on our conference attendance? But that's what Black women have had to do. They've had to navigate this intricate space. So Sojourner Truth comes and she says, "Ain't I a woman?" Right? Like, don't nobody put they coat down over water for me. Don't nobody, y'all talking about women's rights. I do everything as great as a man. And then she says, y'all talking about women's rights because women can't have rights as men because Jesus wasn't a man or a woman, right? And then she does this really, really prolific thing where she goes, well, that don't really make sense, right? She said, Jesus was born from God and a woman. Man ain't had nothing to do with it. Right? So it takes women to do this critical analysis of the world they live in every day, right? Because it's these spaces that are saying, you know, we could say we're saying Black Lives Matter, which Black women have, you know, started that initiative, or the Me Too movement, right? You have Black women literally leading up both of these movements. Right?
So now let's look at the rhetorical moves to get to the crux of that. And I'm glad you took it there, to those movements, BLM, Me Too, and right, so if we look at the poem, Ain't I a Woman, and just the examples you gave, like the rhetorical moves that she used to communicate those thoughts, right? You know, if you could point out in a couple examples of what she was communicating with just those basic, you know, rhetorical moves, because you know, we're getting into.
Yeah, so thank you for pushing me on that a little bit. So what Sojourner Truth does is honestly similar to what I'm doing. I'm taking a lead from what she's doing, and that is asking the ethical questions of the day. Right? Why? Right? I ask my students all the time, so without using religion, why are we as a nation against homosexuality? Without using religion, you know, what about abortion? Without using religion, what about, and it's unfortunately, it's hard to get at those questions without using religion. So we have religion reifying all of these isms, misogyny, heterosexism. So we as religion majors need to do that rhetorical work. So what Sojourner Truth is doing is saying, okay, and what everyone's doing, right? Everyone thinks that, and not everyone, but many think that religion is devoid of context, right? That Black people worship in some type of frenzy while white people worship in some other type of context, but we all worship in our own context. That's why Dr. Martin Luther King would say, you know, 10 a.m. on a Sunday is the most segregated hour. We're all worshiping separately. And so what we're doing is, and even with Trump this last time, he had the highest, it was 81% for evangelicals who voted for Trump. Now, the evangelicals, theologically, right, or religiously, their doctrine does not align with Trump's action, but their context of whiteness does. And it's not different from others. So our context shapes our reality, even our religious consciousness. So you mean to tell me that Black people are not human? But God says we were all made in the image. So now you're doing these kinds of, you're doing these critical analysis of the text giving you that truly impacts your ethics, right? They said that Black people, because of Ham, right, which was one of Noah's sons, right? Noah who built the ark. Ham came in, saw Noah naked, or maybe slept with Noah. We don't know, right? And so now we're supposed to use that and allow that to shape our own reality, to say that Black people are descendants of Ham and they're cursed, therefore they should be slaves. That's really what white Christians said here. So what Black people had to do, or I mean, you can do a few things. You can say, forget Christianity, or I know a different Christianity before white people talked about it, or you can say, okay, there's something else in here. I know that I'm not cursed. I know that I am. I know that I'm doing the same quality work as my colleague. Why am I getting paid, right, 60 cents to the dollar? Right. I know that I am a woman because I've borne children and I've seen them all sewn off to slavery. But y'all are talking about coats, right? So it becomes the rhetoric, right, or language used becomes a reality of the context that they're in. So it's one thing for someone to use the language devoid of the context, then you don't get the same meaning.
So her saying, ain't I a woman in the 1920s? I mean, not the 1920s. When did they publish that poem?
1865, 90.
Yeah, I was way off. I was tripping. Indeed. But nonetheless, right, and then saying it in 2021, it may take on a different context.
Oh, for sure.
And co-opted or appropriated, and they have negative connotations. Used, borrowed might have less negative connotations.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm not trying, that's not my thing. I'm just trying to find an appropriate word, right? And used in a totally different way. And we've seen some of those things because I know it's been used in a lot of immigrant studies. We are here too, or we were here too. But it was really started by Black women historians, particularly one, and who was writing about Black women like we were here too.
Yeah. And no plug, but the title of my book is Ain't I a Preacher? And it's talking about Black women preachers. And I think it's integral to thinking about those places that are dominated by dominant groups, right? Whether a Black woman is rapping, right? We have a lot of discussion, Cardi B or Meg or Sweetie or these 4 Black women rappers who have distinct qualities of rhetoric, but they're always compared. When I could list maybe 20 men who sound similar, but it's something about being these
they sound dominated. Exactly the same.
Oh, exactly the same.
Like we all grew up on the south side of Atlanta.
They did, but see, Meg, the difference between Meg and Cardi B. But I think it's something about being in these dominated spaces and having a different perspective, right? And that has to be spoken up. You all are talking about Black Lives Matter, and Black women have always been and inclusive, right? So you talk about Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, and I don't want to say co-opted, but does it privilege those people who created it most? I talk about this, and this is just kind of just me and you talking. I talk about the Me Too movement. It's hard. It's hard because I think about, certain people who already have power doing it versus people who don't. And those around it. So the Me Too movement was created to kind of showcase sexual assault or abuse, to kind of visualize how prevalent it was, and to not be silent about it. And I believe Sister Burke was one of the founder. And it's a difference between a millionaire career person or even myself, right? Um, coming out on allegations, right, against someone. Um, and someone, you know, in the hood whose uncle, right, who would destroy the family. It would destroy the city. I know for a fact, if two women in my hometown came forward, our city would be destroyed, right? Yeah. But the onus would become on the women,
yeah,
and not the predators, you know. And so I think what I love about Black women's rhetoric has always been direct. As far as language, it's always been clear, it's always been direct, and it's always been poignant to those systems of power. Right. And so if people felt the need to steal or borrow or, you know, put it on layaway, it was because it's a necessary perspective to fight power. Mm-hmm. And they still don't get the benefits of it, right? But I think it's interesting in the sense of those movements being started by Black women. I hadn't even, yeah, I think it's interesting.
Now,
yeah, go ahead.
Well then let's talk about sneakers then.
Sneakers.
Chuck Taylors.
Okay.
Right, now that's something that's turned into something a lot larger than what I thought. And I could be wrong, but I believe Stacey Abrams first may have had on some Chucks, and then Vice President Kamala Harris. And now it's communicating something. But it was communicating a particular thing for Black women at a particular time. Now it's communicating broader things, perhaps, you know. And based upon your conversation with Rhetoric, you know, I mean, that's something that I see. And for me, and I could be wrong because I'm just a dude, right? I was interpreting it as that was indicative of Black women's electoral power, and not just the existence of it, but they are now showing clear examples of how to wield and control and dictate it, and not be the pawns of other actors, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what the Chuck Taylors, I thought, for me. But I'm a guy, so I could be reading it totally different than what, you know, it was communicating to Black women, and now it's beyond that, it appears.
I think it's a good perspective to think about what does Black women's language and rhetoric look like or sound like for other audiences. The Chuck tees and specifically is something I probably, as I don't want to be homogenous in talking about Black women, but I hate Chuck tees. So I particularly didn't wear them, but I do think you're on to this, both a political power and this kind of trying to relate to a particular audience, right? Black women, as much as we love Michelle Obama, right? We don't have those things in our closet.
Right. Oh, that's facts.
I mean, she's beautiful, yeah, and amazing, but what is accessible? Right? Yeah. Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris have been talking about working class and impoverished people, which has not been a rhetoric in politics for a long time. We've been talking about middle class, middle class, middle class, middle class. And so to talk about a Chuck Taylor shoe that probably retails at, I don't know what it retails at, $40 to $70. Maybe
that's a good range around there, more the 70 range.
Yeah.
But relatively inexpensive in regards to high profile sneakers.
Right. I mean, it's not, bloody shoes or red bombs or Louboutins or whatever, that's not what they are. They had to put those, it would have been a
Nike athlete of the month or the year or the decade.
Right. Right. So it was something that was accessible. I can't speak to it in depth because I'm not versed on it, but I think that that's interesting that you talk about Black women and what they might evoke from other audiences. I do know I posted a picture with pearls that day that Harris was during the inauguration, and someone not Black or not a person of color too was responded that they too wore their pearls. And
that was interesting to you?
Very interesting in the sense that I remember being in graduate school, and I wonder if you remember me writing this op-ed piece. We were all in graduate school teaching these rhetoric classes, these writing classes, and we were all pretty amicable, really cool. And if we had to like sub for each other's classes, we would. And there was a lot of us mixed race, and one of the girls asked, one of the white girls asked one of us Black girls, if we could cover her class, and it was nothing out of the norm. And but at the end, she entitled it, "Help a sister out." And so it may not have been right the language, right? Could we help, right, a fellow woman who needed it? Of course, right? I think that had it been, of course, I think any of us would have been readily and accessible to do so. But what it means about language is you have different levels of proficiency.
Yeah.
All right. And this goes for every language. You say, novice, right? A novice, or all the way to fluent or native speaker, right? And so when you get to native speaker, it becomes more about cultural context than it does the language. I had a friend from France who was trying to ask me to elaborate on what the word humping meant in English, because he knew what the word hump meant as like a hump, but he didn't understand humping. And for me, it was, you have to put yourself in that context to kind of understand. So now if I think about language, right, as both it articulates my consciousness, right, it is culturally relevant, right? Now I have this whole other layer of meaning, right? That what my friend or colleague did not do when she said, help a sister out, is to understand Black women and what it is they're communicating, right? So if I want to learn French, I need to really invest myself in that language. I really need to invest myself in that culture, right? I need to know the fromage. I need to know the baguette. I need to know the crepe, right? What happens, right, with Black language in general and Black women's language more specifically is we borrow, steal, or co-opt without ever doing that work of understanding, right? Mm-hmm. So now we have McDonald's saying, I'm loving it. But if we were to say, I'm loving without that G, it in a college paper, right, we would grammatically be indicted, whereas McDonald's capitalizing on billions of dollars based on Black people's or African-American vernacular English. Same thing happens with Black women, right? Yeah. And so it's imperative that we not only hear and listen to the language, intonation, and the cadences of Black women, which are amazing, right? We get excited because Black women are provocative, they're energetic, but what they are they're able to connect to their audience. Stacey Abrams can talk to so many different audiences. Right before that election, she brought herself on the Gucci Mane and Jeezy battle verses. The day before, all of Atlanta was going to be watching that. I'm in New York and I was watching Jeezy and Gucci Mane.
I was in North Carolina watching.
Stacey Abrams knew what her audience was doing before election day.
Yeah.
Right? And she had the wherewithal to say, I don't care if these are gangbangers or what have you. I know the people I'm trying to reach. And she was able to talk to that space. And she can also talk to, predominantly white spaces. We've seen them talk to her. So Black women have been able to communicate to many audiences. I think that it is unfortunate that people have not done the work to figure out what it is that Black women are meaning or thinking through, when I know we would for other languages and rhetors. We study what do we think, Shakespeare is really saying. Black women, they just said that thing.
Yeah. And I'll say this.
Mm-hmm.
If Stacey Abrams had said and dragged Pookie and Corn Pop down to the polls, we'd have been like, yes, Stacey, that's exactly what we're gonna do. We're gonna go get them. When Obama said it, many of us was like, bro, you ain't got the right or privilege to even talk like that. You're an outsider to the community. And when Joe Biden said, of course, we was like, sit down, please. Right? I mean, it's like it was an insult.
Yeah.
To us, because it means something different. One, no matter if your name is Dr. David Walton, there's a Black woman out there that don't call you David Walton, call you Porky, and other, and as a result, other Black women like her sisters.
Yeah.
I like call that out, by that. It means I don't know what you think.
I like that because it sounds like Black women have a certain cultural authority that they don't have in other spaces like religious and political authority. But Black women have a cultural authority that is and when you said that about Stacey, I was trying to juxtapose her not being like a mammy, but authoritative,
exactly.
A figure, and that requires a lot, right? And that can even be rhetoric. Black women have created this kind of, how do I, as a Black woman who doesn't have authority in politics, economics, right? How do I gain authority, right? It could be in the way I look. Right? A lot of us know a mother's look to like stop doing something. The look signifies a lot of things without communicating. David Walton, get your raggedy self together. It's a look that signifies that you are behaving in a way that is less than ideal, right? And so I think we've probably out of necessity and had to figure out how to insert agency. And I think it's a great question that everyone talked about Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me, and I always ask the question, do Black men have agency? And so you think about Black women and how do you insert your agency? How can you do what it is you want to do? And the beauty about Black women is that if Black women are treated with dignity and respect, it privileges everyone, right? It privileges women, it privileges Black people. And Black women have never solely asked for resources for just Black women, right? Which is the genius of have you watched the Black Lady sketch comedy show?
I haven't. Is it good? I'll check it out.
It's amazing. It's amazing because it just centers Black women. And so there's this one scene with all Black women in the courtroom. And at first they're entering like, "Ooh, what what's going on here? Just the judge, and then the person that records, and then the attorneys. And after a while, everybody keeps coming in like, what? Which it speaks to the absurdity of our daily lives, right? I currently am the only Black person in my department. And almost even in the college, there aren't many of us. So if I were to walk into a conference that's not Black studies, right, and see all Black women, is just not a world that we live in.
Indeed.
I can ask my students, and I even share myself that I didn't have Black women professors or teachers coming up. I didn't have Black professors at all. So now, what are you communicating? But I like that idea about cultural capital that Black women have, I believe, inserted and used as a sense of safety for a Black community. I don't think that Black women overuse or take advantage of that power that we have, as far as like a power trip, or but it is to keep the community moving forward. And it's necessary. It's necessary that they have someone that knows the whole cultural gambit of how do I get this person to move, right? And that is an aspect of rhetoric. If we want to just talk about an aspect, right? If we want to just talk about persuasion, how do Black women persuade? Right? How do I get you to do this thing? Very easy. If I say, right, I play basketball. If I say, if I can do it, right? If a Black woman can do it, what's your excuse?
Indeed. And I think, indeed, right? And I think for many of us who aren't Black women, but we're Black, I think what Stacey Abrams communicated to us, and I'm not a resident of Georgia, she communicated this to me. And I think many of us across the nation, we gotta get this vote out, and we gotta register people to vote and get them to vote and make sure they vote. But I feel like she did it talking to me and using the same words, but they mean different things to different communities, where white people didn't even realize she was talking to me.
For sure.
Right?
For sure.
And she was talking to me as like the older sister, because I'm an older man. So, but like as that moral compass on the street, in the Black neighborhood we live on. Miss Martha don't want y'all playing over there in that lot.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, it. So you might do everything else that you ain't supposed to be doing.
Right.
You ain't gonna play in that lot because Miss Martha don't want you in that lot.
And you know what I like about Miss Martha, the Miss Martha reference and Stacey Abrams, is the respect. Yeah. There's some type of respect. And I think that I don't know Miss Martha, but I would imagine she's given the same type of respect. And it's those women who usually show you by example that now when they speak, it's stamped by their actions, right? I don't have to go on a tirade. I'd say, you can do it. Because now I'm waiting on because Black women already know and evoke for an excuse. There's no excuse you give to a Black woman. And as a Black man, you know that. Indeed. Right? Because I don't want to hear it. Right? I'm here. So I like that. And it's interesting. It's this double entendre, right? This to hear twice, and Black people have always mastered the speaking or to speak in a nuanced way so that the master, right, didn't hear. That's why you had these songs. For those of us who've watched the movie Harriet, they're singing these songs and they're telling them what's happening, right? And even, what's his name? Key and Peele. key, right? When he was doing the angry version of
Barack Obama.
Obama,
Yeah,
right?
the angry
Most black,
translator.
the angry translator, right? Most black people didn't need that translator, right?
And
We already knew this is what Obama was saying,
yeah,
and likened to black women, right? If we're already speaking a certain thing, we already know what. So when Cardi B says, "I don't cook, I don't clean, but I'll show you how I got this ring," she doesn't really have to tell us how she got the ring, even though it's going against what a woman is supposed to do primarily to have a husband, right? You're supposed to cook, you're supposed to clean.
mhm.
And she's like, damn that. And I'll still get what I want. Um,
And that reminds me of the use. And the irony of it all is some of the lyrics, some of the songs were written by white guys, Jewish guys,
yeah, yeah,
but are the blues women,
yeah,
of the 20s. And I'm relying my limited understanding on Angela Davis's book about it. So, I'm being transparent. But it reminds me about and how those songs sung equally the same, every note, but was sung by white women, it wouldn't have made sense. Better
yeah,
yet, been popular, right?
yeah.
Because of you know the use of rhetoric and language, and in that case, I would argue a little bit of some appropriation because did the white guys truly understand, or that's a different conversation.
That's actually interesting because you made me think of so much. Dr. Shirley Logan talks about Black women's use of persuading by the presence,
Yeah.
their presence.
Mhm.
That Black women have a certain type of presence, which I think is amazing. And it's interesting that you bring up the blues, because I was thinking about Billie Holiday, "Strange Fruit." That these white men are writing writing these lyrics. And you know what though too, I was just thinking about before you mentioned that is Nicki Minaj's quarrel with Cardi B has always been, girl, you don't write your stuff. Which has been different for Black women. I know for Black men, right? We've gotten to accept, some people don't write or we collaborate in hip hop. But for Black women, we've had to do so much. We don't get
And
to,
the irony, I think the same thing in the church.
right?
Black male preachers have been borrowing sermons from one another
Hmm.
since as far back as people can trace, right?
Hmm.
Basically
Hmm.
coming out of slavery. But people will react and respond to a black woman preacher involving something like that, right? If she's having male collaborators, then is she really a preacher, and why have her as a preacher, right?
Mm.
Yeah, these pushbacks that people would try to use to undermine, or is it differently? And then I want to talk about the white lady that was talking about praying for all the angels for Donald Trump that
Oh,
TD Jakes made possible. But go ahead.
you were talking about, what were you just talking about? For
Preaching, borrowing sermons,
oh
making
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah. So
acceptable.
the sermons, I'm gonna push back on you with the sermons, in that women are not only combating, the dominance, but it is the whole religion, right? So predominantly Black denominations, just in Christianity, don't allow Black women to teach or preach. Right? So by doctrine, right? There may be individual places that are like, oh, we're AME or we're Kojic, right? Or Church of God in Christ, and we allow women to preach. But by doctrine, the history of Black women preaching in the church has a whole long lineage of Black women jumping denominations, right? And getting ordained in Presbyterian churches where they had to attend graduate school, right? Once they attend graduate school for United Methodist or Presbyterian, then you have a better shot of, going there. Whereas most Black churches have a more of an apprentice type type way to get on. So early on, Black women were preaching alongside Black men. Um, but Black men were denying them, access to become preachers. So um, in terms of rap versus the religion aspect, I think what you really have to see, and you get this whole cultural aspect too, right? Um, you really have to wrestle with the text. Right? Black men have been wrestling with the text in terms of actually now a lot of Black preachers are prosperity gospel, which works for people that are poor and life sucks. Prosperity feels good to hear. That's why it works. But what about disrupting the status quo? Right? Black women make up 80% of the Black church, but they don't have the authority. They have financial authority. If they didn't give their tithes and offering, it would shut down. But so now what? What are they preaching about? Right? And you said, somebody would rather hear a Black woman preach. I don't know. There's a lot of
That's
people
me.
yeah, there's still a lot of people who are like, I don't know that a woman could be a pastor.
I was going to
in the same.
Yeah, I was going to AME Zion Church.
Yeah.
Red Springs, North Carolina. When I lived downstate. Black woman preacher, Reverend Sharon Mitchell. Phenomenally amazing. I went one time and just kept going every Sunday.
Nice.
That's
amazing.
Saying? So I'm biased.
No, and you know what? And
every guest preacher, the head of that region of the AME Zion Church, all of them who came through and preached, they was wasting my time and should have just let her back on.
When was this? What year was this?
This was 2018 and 19, going into before the pandemic.
When you were in Michigan, did you have women preachers there?
Or no, I didn't. And then Islam, they ain't got none. But no, I didn't. I had never been to a church in Michigan where they're visiting or otherwise where there was a woman pastor.
Me either, right? So, and that becomes, right, we don't either know that Black women preach. Are they preaching? What are they preaching? Because it's one thing to preach. I'm not going to name any preachers, but let me try to think of a different aspect. Okay, Young and May, right? This Young and May is a rapper. I wouldn't call her a feminist.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I have no authority to say that, but I do have the authority to say I can recognize misogyny, and her lyrics are straight Black male heterosexual misogyny.
And so, what type of women do we allow to rap or to speak aloud, right? What is Wanda Sykes saying versus Monique? Yeah. What is Obama saying, right, versus Dick Gregory? Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I'm not looking at the, certain people. I'm looking at these women who are disrupting this status quo, who's massaging these texts in the same way that LGBTQ people are using their rhetoric and their own or our own subjectivity to understand the text. What does it mean? The Bible doesn't say anything about women sleeping. And then if it does, right, if it's talking about homosexuality, it's the work of us to really figure out what's going on there. Right? What was going on back then in Sodom and Gomorrah that they would enact these laws.
Now, when it comes to rhetoric and its use in popular culture, and it goes mainstream, right? So you use like an example of, African-American English vernacular, and we are all somehow, some way, indirectly, students of Dr. Geneva Smitherman, right? But nonetheless, when we're talking about that, like, I'm loving it, McDonald's, African-American English vernacular. Now, in regards to specifically like Black women's rhetoric, you know, in how it's going mainstream, it's pop, commercialized, commodified, and appropriated. Uh, do you think that it hurts Black women's use of rhetoric? Because, for example, we'll use the acronym because it may be children watching. Cardi B, Meg Thee Stallion, the song WAP, W-A-P. Now, in the Black community, no matter if they're older or teenagers who shouldn't have no business knowing this, but we know teenagers, right? WAP doesn't simply mean that low level profane. It's talking about something much greater as well, right? Uh, from my limited perspective, it's going deep into power of persuasion, right? The controlling of situation and people, right?
Yeah.
Agency is what I'm scratching at, right?
Right.
But to many people in the broader broader society, it just was being interpreted for sexual prowess or sexual ability. You see, and then me just as a Black man from a Black community, right? I recognize the layers of like I may have had someone say that to me before in my life, and I understood at least those limited 3 or 4 dimensions.
Yeah.
And even have more dimensions to that I don't understand, because those sisters weren't just talking to men. Their main audience was actually women. So they was saying something to y'all that I missed. And I understand and acknowledge that. You know what I'm saying? So
I think to your latter point at the end, right? If black women or women are talking to women and someone else interprets it different, why, it's more of, why are y'all butting into the conversation, right? There's an audience, there's a message, it's clear. And so right, you always have these cultural, right, these insular and kind of connections to the outside, right? You'll have the chicken circuit or the chitlin circuit, and then you'll have those who don't go in the chitlin circuit. And so there's this question about, once the world sees us and they do something with it, is that good or bad? That could be anything. If the only way not to do that, because Black people do not control media or the US, is to be autonomous. And that means being in a place where it's just Black people speaking and talking to Black people. Now, Black people love these spaces, and right, and we should have them, right? But we are all influence other cultures, and so unless people want to listen to us, because we're saying pretty much similar messages throughout different ways. You're a historian, right? Black Lives Matter, I'm not sure has articulated much else different than others outside of, kind of a disruptive kind of leadership.
Well, the best way I could put it in regards to rhetoric, the only thing new that they added, I'm keeping it 100, was an earnest commitment and allyship with the Black LGBTQI community. To be real, that I can identify. We got lip service in the Black Power movement, to be honest with you, spaces of opportunity with that, with Tupac's mother, Afeni Shakur, when she was working with various Black gay organizations to help them frame a Black Power, Black gay message. Most people don't know that about Mama Afeni, one of the many brilliant things that she did. And of course, then that, along with other, yeah, indeed, and other encounters with other people that led Huey Newton to even draft formal statements for the Black Panther Party. about you know, his was lip service is what I'm saying. But the Black Lives Matter, you know, and then you know what they did to Bayard. They basically, if you let them tell it and don't have a person like Dr. Walton teaching history, you will act like he wasn't a major part of Black history. March on Washington, Montgomery Bus Boycott strategy, you know what I'm saying, and et cetera, right? But
and I mean, and that's another thing. And I Sister Burt, I her first name to Tamarica Burke. She what I like that she says is that America has gotten on a frequency to hear Black women. It's not that we've changed what we've said, is that they're now on a frequency to hear us a little bit better. Now that's all that Black Lives, if that was it, that Black Lives Matter forefronted the voices of Black queer people, that would be enough in itself, because we don't know about Malcolm X and James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin, because
well, I won't get in with the Malcolm X assertion.
I mean, it doesn't matter. It was a flag. I know. I just said that to get you started.
No, I'm just saying, but I'm for real. And you know, I went to the conferences, I listened to the scholars, I looked at the, you know, so I'm on the side of that was a reach, a claim to that hasn't been supported yet. I'm not saying it isn't true. You know, I mean, there's many reasons why it could be true. And one simple reason is he was a human being. So why can't it be true? But nonetheless, so that was why I was pushing back so the people watch.
Well, and I think it's one of those things where it's like we're trying to get authority enough to say, hey, if Michael Jordan was gay, would he be an exception? Like, would you listen to us then? Right? Did you know that such and such was gay? And people are like, why do we need to know that? We don't need to know Malcolm X's. And it's like, we just want to be heard, right? It's like, we have been the leaders of this movement. As you're talking about women, Black queer people have been leading this movement, as especially Black Lives Matter, but movements throughout history. And so you talk about that type of rhetoric. I've been watching a lot of Pose lately, and you get a lot of, that's where you can talk about language being co-opted, right, without context of culture, right? People use the language of Black queer people from the 80s, right? They were saying shade and read and all of that back long time ago, but to not have that context or culture, it still doesn't have the same meaning. So it's about what we mean, and Black women are, I mean, they're typically clear. I think the rhetoric of it, though, is we have to be mindful. And back to Young M.A. Is her rhetoric is is misogynistic. Right? Her rhetoric, she is a woman, but her rhetoric is not feminist, right? So when we're looking at women, there are several women, right, who are preaching, or, you know, but they're preaching the same thing that men are preaching, right? Women, you need to do these things. You need to cook, clean, have your skirt down past your knees, and do all these things. And they're preaching the same hyperbolic grievances that men are. So what would it take for you to not accept what the oppressor says to you, right? That slave, go obey your master, right? But to do that nuanced thing, to actually know, like, I'm gonna say that to you. When the white people are around, I'm gonna preach, obey your master. But when they're away, the Black preacher is the one that helped, you know, people escape. Now, how do you juxtapose those realities, right? So that's what Stacey Abrams is doing when she's talking to you and all of the United States. She's saying, we need to vote. Yeah. Right. And when she's looking at you like that, you feel convicted. You like, shoot, Stacey said I need to vote, right? And it's this conviction that you understand because you understand the culture. Yeah. And as somebody that's that is invested in bringing the culture forward, not just re-articulating the same issue. I think that might be a reason why, and you talked about Obama, that might be a reason why people are like, nah, not Obama, but it was the Black woman that solidified his Blackness. If it had not been for Michelle Obama, if he was married to, you know, Becky with the good hair, not to say that that couldn't have been Black women, it wouldn't have worked out.
Oh, and I hope everyone knows that, because definitely that's, you know, it. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't read enough, so they didn't read when he said, I didn't even really know I was Black till I got to college.
Yeah.
Right, my grandfather.
I mean, how would he? That was his parent.
And then and took it even further, said my grandfather had me passing for Native Hawaiian. Right. So, you know, indeed, right. So he doesn't hide that reality. It's just people just don't want to see it that way. And so, like Barack Obama, now we could say, all right, he like Unc. When we were talking about Black rhetoric, right? So an older Black man in the community, Unc.
You talking about Obama?
Yeah, now he Unc, but he wasn't gonna be that. A lot of people,
I don't know. I think Michelle is auntie, but I don't know.
Oh, she's definitely auntie, no question. And I was going to use Maxine Waters as that example of that authority.
Right.
Right. You know, like, no, she auntie, give her respect. She don't take no mess. Right. So we ain't going to argue with her about it. Nothing. If she want to come to our town, give a speech and say that y'all need to get together, we going to let her tell us that we need to get together. And we're going to get in these little organizations and we're going to get it together. Right. That's what Black people are going to do if Maxine Waters came to town and gave a speech, and she ain't even from our district, but that's what we're going to do, right? Barack Obama, I don't think we're going to respond that way with him, right? But, and he got that authority as a reverend, though, but definitely we wouldn't even call him Unc. We might even call him, some people might even call him Granddad.
Maybe.
And I was going to say Reverend Barber. Reverend Barber, I think Black people.
Reverend Barber would, yeah.
Yeah, we wouldn't even call him Unc. We would call him Granddad type deal. You know what I'm saying? With that type of love. And there ain't many granddads in a lot of impoverished Black communities.
And I think even in you naming who we would be for and who we would be like, you know, it's naming something. What is that thing? And it's the level of commitment to our culture, right? Obama was able to connect with us by using Black language and rhetoric, right? Every time he sang an Al Green song, we were like, what? Right? Every time he said, you know, some type of African-American vernacular English, we lit up because we said, oh, maybe he is, right? Even though his politics were wishy-washy, mediocre, right? But then again, I think that's something we don't look into more about co-opting is our excellent people, right? Those like if we were to juxtapose Lauryn Hill and Cardi B, it's not the same. It's not. Right? The respect might be similar. It's just it's a different message for a different time, right? And in saying would Black people rock for Lauryn? Would they rock for Cardi? And for what reasons would they do those things? And I think we're in a different space than we were for Lauryn Hill, because I love Lauryn. I grew up with Lauryn, and I'm like, you know, you got fake nails from Koreans, fake hair about Koreans, man, come again. You know, I really like that. And Cardi is saying, this new generation is saying, I can do all these and I'm still, respect me, right? Even if I have long nails and the ashes, that has nothing to do with my integrity. And Lauryn was saying, girl, be integrity, love who you are, your Blackness, and these things, different messages. Who end up being succumbed to patriarchy, I'm not sure. They both have these guy problems where their man cheat on them. So let's talk about doing, right? So now when you get a Stacey Abrams who's doing the work, there's no excuse you give to Stacey Abrams. It's hard. She's in Georgia and just lost by them cheat. Well, she just lost in Georgia, and she's still working, right? We lose and we were like, oh, it didn't work out. I tried to get this, this pass through, the Jack and Jill group didn't want to, take the kids to the field trip. I'm done with Jack and Jill, or I'm done with Deltas because, they didn't want to do my 5K. And to still be working and with a positive attitude and with integrity and just asking you to do the bare minimum. Black women were the last women in this country to vote. So if a Black woman asks you to vote, it's like the audacity to say no is
yeah, no, indeed.
I even think it juxtaposes the audacity to hope, because Black women do. You have to, or they really ain't gonna hear you, right? We don't get to just dream. One day they have to do. And I think that perseverance, right? Ida B. Wells, and the creating of all these groups, these Black women organizations are the reason that, rhetoric came to the forefront. But without Ida B. Wells' anti-lynching works, what civil rights movement,
Oh, indeed. Yeah, I hope some of my students from that class listening, because that's where we start. I position that as the start of the long civil rights movement, her anti-lynching campaign. It took over from Frederick Douglass's abolitionist campaign. And, but now I want to switch it up just a little bit. I don't know the lady name, but I saw you heard the clips. The lady, she was calling from the angels from all over the world. The white lady doing some performative stuff in rhetoric. Black pulpit and Black women, some Black women who, use that style of preaching. And she's a former mentee or whatever of Bishop T.D. Jakes. I mean, I don't know. I just saw that as like at the height of.
Was that Paula White?
I think that's her name. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't remember it all. But I will speak to the part of, and I do think this is really good when you're talking about co-opting. What is notable is Black performance and rhetors. People understand it. I just was watching Jumanji, and I don't know how I feel about it. The second one, and Jack Black was now the Black person.
Okay.
And his Black scent, I don't know, but there are Black rhetorical devices that work. People understand that Black people have a certain aversion to religion, and that the preachers evoke or solicit a certain response. That's why Obama uses Black preaching rhetorical devices like call and response.
Yeah.
So that she would evoke, right, these Black preaching rhetorical devices, like spontaneity in praying, right, like evoking spirits or whatever, to solicit a certain kind of response. But her cultural again, you're not steeped in the culture. So it's not just the language, it's what does that mean?
Yeah.
For Black people to use language and spontaneity to have a relationship with a person or a being, because their suffering is so bad that you either kill yourself, believe in an entity beyond yourself, or just suffer through it. Black people really, when they're preaching, they have a type of profound rhetoric that people feel close to. And so why not use it, right? People use it to play, and right, they use the hooping, where it's a breathing technique for preachers to actually breathe. They're not really just doing that. They're actually, usually he'll teach preachers, they'll say and they're actually breathing. But people use those rhetorical devices to solicit persuasion. They want people to move. They want to make action happen. And when you're calling upon a divine being, typically you are out of control with what's going on. So you could call angels from Egypt, Timbuktu, whatever. Your politics and your context is whiteness. And there's not much that Trump has done that aligns with Christian doctrine for that many Christian evangelicals to support him. For instance, I mean, of those 81%, imagine who was the last evangelical president? Can you remember the last president that the evangelicals supported? Mind you, they condemned Clinton.
Yeah, indeed. I was going to argue perhaps W. Bush, but definitely Ronald Reagan. He kind of, but that's when they stepped on the scene the hardest through Ronald Reagan. So maybe W, maybe.
Carter.
Wow, I didn't even know that. Well, he after Reagan, but nonetheless.
Ain't that wild though? But Jimmy Carter and Trump.
I know.
So what ends up happening is,
I love Jimmy Carter though.
He's one of my favorite. He's probably my favorite president.
He get a bad rap.
Yeah, but it goes from this religious aspect to how do I not protect myself? And then some people use religious. I mean, we all do, right? Like, that ain't of God. What is that? What does that mean? Oh, I don't feel that in my spirit. I don't want to have sex now because I'm saving myself, or whatever. And those are religious rhetoric that have real impacts on your everyday life. It's not just talking, it's articulating a belief, and our beliefs, for the most part, there's a relationship between our beliefs and actions, right? Do we do what we believe, right? Or do we believe what we do, right? If we really believe that premarital sex before is a sin and we'd go to hell for it, how might we act? If we engage in that activity, what do we really believe about it? Maybe we believe it ain't that bad. I'm not sure, right? But when we co-opt our belief systems and use language to persuade people to act in a way, that's problematic, right? So we say, oh, women should not be preaching, right? Because it says so in Timothy, right? Or it says so in, right? However, you allow your woman to pray for you, to cook for you, but no, it says it in the Bible, and we'll contextualize it there, but we won't contextualize what was going on in the Bible at that time, right? We don't know what was going. Well, I mean, Bible scholars know, but it's up for us to do that, to say, and for the most part, I don't know what it's like to be a man, right, who hasn't had something that said all men can't, I don't know, go to a bar or something. It's like, wait, the Bible, I didn't even say that, but we use, if it's something that's effective, like preaching, that has been known in the past in Black communities to have an impact politically, right? And Paula White has been trained in that preaching, right? Apprentice type stuff. She's trying to use it to persuade a political agenda. It makes sense. It makes sense. It's what evangelicals are doing. Sad.
Now, Now, in closing, first, I'll give you, is it anything that you wanted to talk about that you didn't get a chance to bring up and discuss?
I think I do want to just try to make clearer language and rhetoric a little bit. Because I think we've been using rhetoric kind of just interchangeably. And I do want to make it clear. So rhetoric is not just the use of language. It's a communication practice that people use to articulate thoughts and ideas. All right. And so that can be, but is not limited to language. Right. And we're talking about Black women, right? It could be the way we do our hair, right? It could be the way we use our onomatopoeias, right? It could be a look. And these things communicate a particular thing amongst the in group and outer group. So I just wanted to make it clear that rhetoric is a system that encompasses language, but is not language in and of itself. And that Black women primarily have been speaking from this space of, or using language in the space of trying to elevate both their communities or all of their intersecting communities of being Black, woman, queer, able-bodied, all of these things Black women are trying to showcase meaning because they're not in a position to be heard. Unfortunately, Black women don't have power, and you don't have to listen to people who don't. So what are the kind of nuances? What are the kind of things Black women use, right, to get their message out, right? And we talked about Stacey Abrams. We talked about Cardi B using her agency of her body, and Megan Thee Stallion, and Stacey Abrams opening herself up as an auntie, or Maxine Waters. It's pulling on these virtues and cultural capitals that we know will work, right? I know if I tell a Black male student, get it together, right? It has a lot more pull than if I'm talking to a white male student, right? What do you need to get on track? Yeah. you know, I'm implying a different meaning, right? I'm speaking to a cultural assumption that we've not all had this opportunity, right? And you've come to my class before and you've talked about, you know, those Black people outside of the class who were spat on, who didn't have library cards. So for Black women to resonate with their audience, no matter who it is, right? Do I have to be auntie right now? Do I have to be a guilt tripper, right? Because if a Black woman can do it, right? I'm just asking you to vote. Yeah. I'm not asking you to have a baby and, you know, get guilt in your house. I'm asking you to vote. So I think it's a genius, and it's a epistemological genius for Black women to insert their agency in these spaces. Sojourner Truth wasn't on the program. I'm sure Stacey Abrams wasn't on that Versus program. Yeah. Right. How do we do that? And so I just leave with saying that thinking about those meaning-making strategies when Black women are talking or communicating in general, mixed with those languages, what kind of things are, if they're saying these things, what does it mean, right? And I just thank you for allowing the conversation to happen.
Well, I thank you for being willing to have the conversation. And more people, you know, need to hear this conversation and these types of conversations related to this subject to get better understanding, better be able to identify the strengths and how it could be further used, these types of approaches to for the furthering in betterment of, you know, struggling Black communities. You know, and this is global Black studies, so, you know, we don't have to qualify or apologize that Black people are the focus.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of my focuses, and I take from Black women, is to push people to critically think. That question is beautiful. Ain't I a woman?
It is.
You can't even answer I mean, it doesn't even allow you to answer. I didn't ask you to answer the question. It invokes an absurdity. Black women are always showcasing the absurdity.
And I think that's something, and then I'll have you respond and we can wrap it up. I think that's part of the brilliance of just the term Black Lives Matter. And, you know, I've thought about it like, well, is what the people want, I know what they want, the All Lives Matter people. Many of them are white supremacists, to be real, and others are being influenced, whether they recognize it or not, by that, because it sounds like a logical response. Like, no, all lives matter. So it's like, no, we're not going to put the comma to, or not even the comma, the TOO. Black Lives Matter too, because that's like begging. That's like, come on, Black Lives Matter too. No, but the declaration, Black Lives Matter, kind of like not the question, ain't I a woman? It's like, no, ain't I a woman?
Right.
It's a, it's in,
It wasn't a question, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very poignant, and that's the thing that I hate about rhetoric to a sense, because I talked about it in the beginning, that this field was started with thinking about persuasion and how do we use language to persuade. And our political systems and our law system, it's almost hard for me not to listen, because it's good. It's good rhetoric, right? All I have to do is make you doubt, right? So now you pulled me into a conversation about, do we matter? Or also, or you've pulled me, and now the meaning, the process was just to deflect the conversation from there.
Yeah.
It didn't matter what the conversation was. Can I pull you? Right? When Trump was on for the quid pro quo, the rhetoric used to just get you to think different, right? It's like, well, what about Joe Biden's son? Right? It was very persuasive to just get you to dart over. And it's persuasive in the sense that all we're trying to do is disrupt the meaning of the message. Right? As clear as you can make it. And that has more to do with the value of those making the statements. That you can refute that someone matters is interesting. But yeah, I thank you for this conversation, and we'll continue to have it on and off screen. But I think it's imperative that we take into account what Black women are saying and what they mean. And we saw what's taking place over this last election. What's going on in this movement, Black Lives Matter, as well as Me Too. Our Black trans sisters are dying daily, and not many people are talking about it. And we are trying to forward the conversation in the community. So I appreciate it. I'll keep doing the work, and we'll keep talking about it. But thank you for this opportunity, and those of you that joined us, with your dinners and stuff, I appreciate you for coming. You could have been anywhere else, but you decided to join us here, and I'm just grateful for that. So thank you.
Thank you all. And on behalf of Global Black Studies at Western Carolina University, thank you, Dr. Marshall. Thank you to the people that joined us, and have a wonderful day.